Good evening, you're listening to The True Tank and I am your host, The Tank. If this is your first time listening to The True Tank, a big welcome. If you're a repeat listener, welcome back. This episode is part 2 of the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. But before then, I've got some very big and exciting news. The Lie of Communism is finally finished. The main part of The Lie of Communism ended up being 300 pages, but 300 pages wasn't good enough for me, so I went ahead and wrote another 120 something extra pages. I officially finished The Lie of Communism on the 25th of August at 12:14 p.m. I took a photo of it, I posted it on Instagram. It's also a way of remembering the date and the time at which I finished. I busted my ass all morning trying to get it done before lunchtime, and I got it done at just after 12. I nearly finished it the Saturday night before, but just ran out of time. I was getting really tired, and I didn't want to continue writing because it would have ended up being shit, and I would have just had to spend the next first hour of Sunday rewriting what I had written the night before. I only had about a paragraph or so to go. It's a big weight off my shoulders. It marks the end of a 2.5-year journey researching and doing a very deep and detailed dive into the murky world of communism. It was a very dark and disturbing story, but it's one that had to be told. The extra 121 pages goes even deeper into the lie of communism, but I'm not going to say much more about that. That's a surprise you'll have to find out when you listen to it. So the script is finished. The next stage of the process is to record all 421 pages, which is probably going to take just as long as writing did. But the hard part was the writing. That's all done and out of the way, so recording should be a lot smoother than the researching and writing part of it. I've even gone ahead and set the official release date for The Lie of Communism. Part 1 comes out March 2025, so circle that in your calendars, set a reminder, because March 2025, the lie begins. I think I've prattled on long enough. Let's get into tonight's episode. This is episode 59 of The True Tank, the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump, part 2.
Welcome to the Dead Podcast. I'm your host, Desi, and on this podcast, I discuss all things spooky and weird, from ghosts, demons, religion, to folklore, urban legends, true crime, and all things paranormal, with some horror movie reviews sprinkled in. So join me on this spooky ride.
And it looks like Kamala is trying to dig up the past in her attempt to try to discredit him even further. Because after the assassination attempt, Trump literally should have been bulletproof from any type of attack. He should have been able to piss on the Constitution on stage and get a free pass. And if you asked me a month ago, I would have said he's a shoo-in. He's going to be the next president. At this point, he is literally uncancelable, and nothing is going to stop him from taking back the White House. Fast forward a few weeks, and it's a different story. If Trump is a criminal, then so is everyone else who has ever got involved in politics. And that's not taking into account the alleged insider trading by Nancy Pelosi and changing the law so her and her husband can't be prosecuted for it. It's just fucking insane. We're living in an insane, upside down, inside out, backwards fucking world. It is just insane to think that in under a month we've gone from a former president running to be president again, who is nearly assassinated. The entire world is outraged by this. There is calm and respect on, the Democratic side for about 5 minutes. Biden goes very quiet. He condones the attacks. There's a week where no donations are to come through as a show of respect. Trump's popularity rises through the roof. So do donations. Biden conveniently gets COVID and bows out of the race, leaving the nomination open. Biden hasn't had it easy either. A few weeks ago, he was going to run for president and nothing was going to stop him. Now he resigns, or is forced to resign by the party. Maybe they told him he wasn't getting his pension unless he bowed out. He resigns, or he's forced to quit. Kamala steps up, and we're back to the same old song and dance. To my knowledge, there hasn't been too many public sightings of Biden. There's a lot of conspiracy theories around that. There's a lot of conspiracy theories surrounding pretty much anything and everything now. Who knows what the fuck to believe. One theory that I did find amusing was Biden died on the way to hospital, or has somehow passed since he quote-unquote got COVID. A better excuse might have created a better cover story. Then there's all those mysterious videos that have been popping up on YouTube and social media of what appears to be Biden's body double. Appears to show a giant Joe Biden body double at the White House. He just happens to have COVID, which is really convenient because he's wearing a mask. He's towering over Jill. This guy looks like he's 6'5", 6'6". Biden's tall, but he's not that tall. He wasn't that much taller than his wife, and this dude towers over his wife. His arms are really long. He looks like a basketball player. He's got that basketball player forearm, where the forearm appears to be much longer than the shoulder to the elbow. I've seen a video of him walking around the White House and him walking with his son and wife across the lawn. He has a very powerful step, which is unlike Biden. He's also much taller than the son. From memory, I think they were roughly around the same height, and this dude appears to be several inches taller than Jill and Hunter. Now, if you're going to pick a body double, at least pick one in the same height range. This guy's also much broader than Biden and doesn't look as frail. He's a much more robust looking character. And while doing the research, I try to find if Biden had been seen since resigning. He resigned via X, which probably isn't the best way to convince people that you're still alive. I don't watch the news every night, I only see it briefly in the morning. But I don't remember seeing a press conference where he officially resigned in front of reporters or cameras. I found a copy of the official resignation letter on CNN.com. So he did release an official statement about the resignation. I just find it very odd, sus, weird that he's in the middle of this campaign. It seems to be going well. He's diagnosed with COVID. Then he has to go away into isolation and recover. At the same time, there's calls from his own party to resign and step down and let someone else run for president. And some of his closest supporters like George Clooney and Barack Obama have also turned their backs on him. He has to step out of the public light, recover in isolation. No one really sees him. He resigns, and then now Kamala steps up. This brings up the question, is Joe still with us? It's out of the Oval Office and onto the home for him. This shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. We could all see Joe wasn't all there and that he had declined severely over the last 4 years. He's not the same man as he was when he became president. The cognitive decline was pretty obvious. The last debate didn't go his way. It's the mumbling words, the look of confusion on his face, looking around, looking in the opposite direction, walking into hedges, smelling people's hair, falling downstairs, shooting yourself in public, not being able to make it onto the stage without the help of your wife. There was more than a few cues that something wasn't quite right with him. And it's not funny either. Like, no one wants to see a loved one decline like that, especially so severely and publicly. I thought Biden was going to be this great president when he came to power. I thought he was going to make things a bit more level in the US, but he joined the side of the woke pretty quickly. And there's probably many different reasons to that I'm not going to get into. He's not the best president. He's not the worst president. He's a president. He's a president at a time in America's history where the country has become very divisive, fragmented and split, and there's a lot of animosity and tension. But he's no better or worse than any other president before him. But all that bullshit aside, I think Biden has earned the right to go out on his own terms. He shouldn't be bullied into a resignation if that's in fact what happened. He's been in politics for over 40 years. He's at least earned the right to at least go out on his own terms, or all guns blazing, going down swinging. Politics is fucking toxic. How quickly they eat their own. These political types, as I just mentioned, some of his biggest supporters, Obama and Clooney, wanted him gone and helped stick the knives in his back. Modern day politics is just like a real life Game of Thrones without the dragons, incest and nudity. Or maybe there's a little bit of incest still left in politics. I don't think anyone with a straight face could possibly say or think that Kamala is the best choice for president either. She's just as batshit crazy and nonsensical as the next person. I think she makes less sense than Biden did. And she's ramping up the Trump Derangement Syndrome and restarting the petty bullshit that got the Democrats into trouble last time around. Trump isn't helping the issue either. Some of Trump's comments recently maybe weren't the wisest, where he said, "Is she Indian or black?" Probably wasn't the smartest idea going into an election. I've only seen what was on the news. I'm sure there's a bunch of that's been blown out of proportion, but probably not the smartest thing to do when you're headed into an election and you want as many votes as possible. But enough about that. Let's go back and have a look at the events of July 13th and the security response, or the lack thereof. So Trump may be the luckiest person in the world. If he moved a second later, the bullet probably would have hit him in the head and killed him. And I think it comes down to luck and a bit of destiny that Trump moved his body and turns a split second before that fatal shot is fired, narrowly missing him and just grazing his ear. Just before he's hit, you can see him waving his hand in front of his face and around his ear, as if he's trying to shoo away a fly. Now, like a lot of you, when I first saw the images of the security guards jumping on Trump, dragging him to the SUVs to get him out of the area, I thought, oh, these guys are doing their job. Looks like a pretty textbook response to this type of situation. It was only in the days and weeks following that a lot of the glaring lapses in security became clear. I listened to a lot of Mike Baker's The Presidential Debrief podcast. It's got me really interested in Secret Service responses. He was saying there was a lot of very obvious and gleaming lapses in security, and the security package the former president got was woefully inadequate for the size of the venue, which I thought was very interesting. He also pointed out some of the failures in the Secret Service response when Trump got hit and went to the ground. One would have been hiring security personnel that were Trump size or taller so they could properly protect him. There was an older agent and a taller dude that looked like they did their job pretty well. They tried to cover his head and put their bodies around him. When you review the video, you can see there's a couple of precious seconds where it doesn't look like a few of the agents know what's going on or how to react. Because the stage is pretty deep. I don't think the sniper could have seen or aimed at Trump there or hit him from the stage. It looked like it was pretty enclosed. When Trump goes down, it takes a couple of seconds for someone to get into gear and get things moving. The older guy does a decent job, so does the younger Secret Service agent, the taller dude. They put their arms around him and try to cover his head. There's a couple of women there that look way too short to be bodyguards. Like, one of them only came up to about his chin. I mean, which is great if you're protecting Danny DeVito or someone shorter, but Trump's pretty tall. How are you supposed to protect the most vital part of him, the head, if you can't cover it? You probably should have had guys that were like 6'5", 6'7", guarding him. That was one oversight. The other one on review, and I didn't see this until probably a week or two after the event, is one of the female agents is hanging back behind Trump. She doesn't look like she quite knows what to do. I think she was the same one that can't find the holster to put her gun back in, which is what you want in a high-stress situation. There's another blonde agent. She looked like she knew what she was doing. She grabs Trump around the shoulders and tries to get him to the car as quickly as possible with the older dude and the other agents. The only problem is she was much too short. So if this was a guy with a better shot, there's a very valuable target being left open. No disrespect to the female agents. I'm all for equality if it means the best people are doing the job. They just look too short to be able to protect a man of Trump's size. The next obvious failure of security was the snipers on the roof, or lack of snipers on the roof, and the excuse given by the former director of the Secret Service that the roofs were too sloped to put snipers on, despite the sniper that killed Trump's wannabe assassin being on a sloped roof himself. You can clearly see him on a sloped roof. He didn't look like he was in any peril or mortal danger. He took the shot pretty quickly when he found the shooter. Sloped roof or not, there needed to be more agents. There probably needed to be more security personnel. Then there was the other issues of local cops not talking to Secret Service. There seems to be a big breakdown in communication, as we saw in that article. 20 to 30 minutes are wasted. The police tell the Secret Service, but nothing seems to be done in those 20 to 30 minutes, which is where the damage was done. We'll probably never find out why they didn't react quicker when they were given clear indication that there was a suspicious person on the roof with a rangefinder. The area also doesn't seem too secure if he can turn up 3 hours before Trump arrives, scout the area. There obviously wasn't a lot of security around those buildings or the site, which you'd think there would be, given you have a former president and presidential candidate appearing at a rally in a few hours' time. Then there is a bomb in the shooter's car and the detonator. Just thank God that didn't go off. Like I said before, how the fuck did no one see a guy climbing on the roof? Presumably he had to get up there with a ladder. Did he carry the ladder? Did he leave the ladder there, set it up beforehand, then come back several hours later, climb the ladder to get into position? Yeah, maybe he did. Maybe he got there. If he was scouting the place out, stands the reason he probably put his gun on the roof, set the ladder up, fucked off, then came back. Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. It would have been very odd if he was walking down the street towards the rally with a ladder and a rifle bag, because there's no way you'd think he'd get past checkpoints or security if there was any. And if the building was checked beforehand, they would have seen a suspicious bag on the roof, which makes the former chief of the Secret Service's passing the buck excuse pretty fucking weak. In the first few days after the shooting occurred, the big excuse by the local cops was that it was out of their jurisdiction and area of operations, which would make you think that the Secret Service would have been in control of that area, but neither side seems to take too much responsibility for that, which is a major fuck up. Another thing I've wondered about, was there another shooter, or was there a plan to have another shooter there in case fuckface missed? Seems likely. I've heard that idea thrown around in recent weeks. Not a lot of evidence for it, because I don't think Trump would have got away with a scratched ear if it was a similar scenario to JFK, but it is possible. If that building wasn't checked, stands to reason there probably was a few other buildings or even trees or something, or vantage points that weren't checked, where another shooter could have been waiting. Maybe the plan was to have fuckface shoot and kill the former president, take the blame for it, and all would be forgotten. Maybe there was another shooter there as a failsafe. Who the fuck knows? That's only a theory. You'd hate to think that there was some type of conspiracy behind this, but it's fucked to think that in this day and age there would be a grand conspiracy like that to assassinate a former president and stop Trump from running in November and being re-elected. You'd hate to think like that, but at the same time, it's happened before, so it could happen again. I think it's more comforting thinking that this guy was a lone wolf and this wasn't part of some grand conspiracy to take out a former president. Fuckface, as I'll refer to him from now on, looks to me like he was a patsy. But a patsy for who? I think he is a patsy for someone. For who? I have no idea. He seems like the most unlikely person to be able to pull this off if he wasn't even that good with a rifle. Maybe he was there to be shot, because so far there hasn't been too much of a breakdown that I know of the angle of the bullets. Maybe there was a second shooter who actually took the shot and Trump just luckily turned his head at the last minute, saving his life, which gave the snipers enough time to find this guy on the roof and shoot him. Not saying the snipers or the Secret Service in this case had anything to do with it. Fuckface is killed, all the blame is laid on him. He dies with everyone thinking he is the shooter, the same way Lee Harvey Oswald did. But I think it's pretty obvious by now Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't the shooter. There's a lot of inconsistencies in that case. And this to me looks like a similar situation. You have a patsy that couldn't really shoot properly, was a quiet loner, interested in politics, and is now dead, so we'll never know. Lee Harvey Oswald, similar situation, quiet loner. The biggest difference with him is he had ties with the Communist Party, so that was a very convenient excuse. In both situations, both weren't that great shots. Lee Harvey Oswald's rifle was crappy and inferior. It was apparently discontinued by the Marine Corps because it wasn't very good, wasn't very accurate. He ordered it from a catalogue apparently, but the gun they found was a right-handed version and he was left-handed, which brings up even more questions. So in my opinion, I definitely think he's a patsy. For who? I have no idea. The breakdown and gaps in security are inexcusable. Trump could have lost his life that day. Thankfully, he didn't. The glaring and very obvious gaps in security are completely inexcusable from an agency like the Secret Service. And this brings up the big question. Who would want Trump dead? Who stands to profit with Trump out of the picture? Probably a lot of people, the Democrats most obviously. Me personally, I think it was an inside job. Could have been the deep state, not saying it is. It seems like the type of thing that they would do to take someone out who was a threat. These are the same people that have been using the same playbook for a very long time. They're not that original. It wouldn't surprise me if they were using the same playbook from the 1960s. Fortunately, Trump survived and lives to fight another day. Will there be further attacks on him? I think something is destined to happen in November, around the time of the election. Will someone try to assassinate him again? I hope not, but I think it's a very high probability. In the days after the shooting, Republicans weaponized the attack on Donald Trump to call out the Democrats, mainly on their relaxed stance on using violence as a political tool. The Democrats, on the other hand, used it to their advantage as well. They played nice, they were diplomatic and sympathetic, and showed genuine care for about a week. Republicans played the outrage and it's not okay card, acting like the morally virtuous side in all of this. Politics is filthy, and in some countries, this is how politics are done. It seems like a foreign concept here in the West that violence is used as a political tool. In some parts of the world, this is politics. In places like Africa, violence and inhumanity are a way of getting a political point across, or securing power, or keeping power. The Serbian president was nearly assassinated a couple of months ago. He was shot by a member of the public, someone in the crowd who was there to see him, apparently. He pulled a gun and shot him in the chest. He survived, but that's not that foreign a thing to happen in Europe or other parts of the world. The Japanese prime minister or president a couple of years ago was shot and killed. Similar situation. He was at an event, members of the public were there, someone pulled a gun out in the crowd and killed him. So a few weeks on, both sides of the political coin are back to name-calling and acting like children. The Democrats have tried to assassinate Donald Trump on different levels, according to some people. They've tried to assassinate his character, they've tried to assassinate him financially and legally, and now someone's tried to assassinate him for real. On all these levels, they have failed. I'm not saying the Democrats had anything to do with the assassination attempt. In some regards, they are responsible for the treatment of Trump and his supporters. Some of the things that Biden and other Democrats have said about Trump, they treat him differently from any other Republican. There's this relaxed view that you can do, say, and treat Trump and his supporters any way you want to because they're less than human in a way. But never have I seen such casual and relaxed use of violence against a rival political opponent like I have in the last 10 years. The Democrats treat Trump like this evil, repulsive thing where you should be able to say and do whatever you like because he's not quote-unquote political. And I think a lot of this comes from Trump Derangement Syndrome. It's widespread. He's had constant threats against him, and the Democratic rhetoric towards Trump has been pretty hostile. There's that famous quote from Biden where he said, "I'd like to punch him in the face. I'd like to take him out behind the bleachers and punch him." If that's not a president freely condoning violence to another candidate or president or former president, I don't know what is. 80-year-old guy saying he wants to punch another guy in the face, which is pretty fucked when you think about it. This is a president. This is a guy with a lot of power, nuclear launch codes, and a lot of prestige saying he wants to punch another former president in the face. That doesn't seem like the way adults should act, especially ones who are the leaders of nations. The day after the assassination attempt, I went to my local supermarket and brought a copy of the paper. The iconic Trump pumping his fist in the air was on every newspaper, pretty much all over the world. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to go get a paper. I haven't brought a paper in a very, very long time. I want to get it because it captures that moment in history. I'm looking at the paper right now. It's historic, and it's something I felt I needed to get because it is a historic and iconic moment in history, even though it's a couple of weeks on and the world seems to have largely forgotten about it. The paper is called The Advertiser, Monday, July 15, 2024. Cost $3. It had some pretty interesting articles breaking down what happened, and this is only 24 hours after the event. There's an article on page 4 titled Party Faithful, Quick to Blame Democrats for Stirring Anger. It's by Tom Minier, however you say his name. The assassination attempt on Donald Trump has sparked a ferocious blame game between Republicans and Democrats that will end up what was already a bitter election campaign. While US President Joe Biden quickly condemned the, quote, sick shooting, Trump's allies rushed to criticize him and his party for stirring up anger about the controversial Republican. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, who is now the vice president nominee, a leading contender to be named as Trump's vice presidential candidate on Tuesday at the party's convention, led the charge, saying the attack was not an isolated incident. Quote, the central premise of the Biden campaign is that President Donald Trump is an authoritarian fascist who must be stopped at all costs, he said. The rhetoric led directly to President Trump's attempted assassination. End quote. Last week, as Mr. Biden stared down calls to drop out of the election race after his disastrous debate performance against Trump, he told donors, we're done, quote, we're done talking about the debate. It's time to put Trump in a bullseye. Ouch. Georgia Congressman Mike Collins shared the quote on social media in the wake of the shooting in a post that said, quote, Joe Biden sent the orders. His colleague, Marjorie Taylor Greene, also blamed Democrats and the media, quote, for every drop of blood spilt today because they had demonized him and his supporters. The president at church in Delaware, when the incident unfolded, told reporters there was, quote, no place in America for this kind of violence. It's sick. That's one of the reasons why we have to unite this country. You cannot allow for this thing to happen. We cannot be like this. We cannot condone this, he said. He said he was praying for his opponent, with the pair later speaking over the phone. But Trump's former chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, also hit out at the Democrats saying, quote, call someone Hitler enough and eventually some nutjob is going to believe you. Now, a former president has been shot and someone else is apparently dead because of Trump Derangement Syndrome, he said. That's a very good point. You keep saying something enough times, people are eventually going to believe it. And while the Democrats might not have, quote unquote, given the orders or be 100% responsible for what happened, they are responsible because they have treated Trump and his supporters like this for a long time now. It should come as no surprise that someone at some stage was probably going to do something like this, if this was a lone wolf attack. There's going to be a lot of Democrats scrubbing their social media tonight, Republican Senator Mike Lee said, to, quote, take the political temperature down. The 4 criminal cases against Trump needed to be dropped to help heal the wounds. A valid point, no matter what side of the political equation you find yourself on. I don't think there's too much denying that the Democrats are on some level responsible for this. There's another article on page 5 by Tom Minier titled Election Turns for Trump, the Tough. This dark day in US politics will go down in history and irrevocably change the course of the election, and not simply for the moment a murderous gunman made a heinous assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Just as significant was the split second that the former president emerged bloodied and defiant, to pump his fist in the air, pledging to fight. If the bullet travelled just a few centimetres in a different direction, you would be reading Trump's obituary. Instead, Trump has been galvanised as a brave fighter. The attempt on Trump's life represents a dramatic turn to an already chaotic presidential contest, which had for the past 3 weeks been dominated by questions about Joe Biden's fitness for office. Trump's bruised but bold defiance in the face of death will be hailed as heroic and cheered not just by supporters, but by many others who were on the fence. It bolsters his tough guy image and is a world away from the frailty that's been witnessed from Biden on the campaign trail. Some will predict this will seal the election. A few weeks ago, I would have 100% agreed with that. Fast forward a few weeks, I'm not so sure, but unfortunately this is just how politics is. 1 week you're hot, 1 week you're not. Someone else comes along, rises in the ranks, popularity swings back and forth, but that's just how the game is played. It will certainly cast a new light on critics of the former president who often use violent imagery in talking about Trump, with even Biden recently telling donors, quote, "It's time to put Trump in a bullseye." Trump and Biden deeply dislike each other, and many Americans don't like either of them. The country is angry, frustrated, divided, and that was before a gunman opened fire on Trump. Serious questions will be asked of the Secret Service and America's law enforcement agencies. How did they fail to stop the shooter? There is still so much to learn about what happened at the rally and what drove the shooter to such a reprehensible act. Republicans claim Democrats stoked the violence, but both sides will likely review their campaign rhetoric now. There will be fear of violent reprisals. All that can be said for sure is that the days and months ahead will test the US like never before. And there hasn't seemed to be too many violent reprisals, thankfully, in the weeks afterwards. I thought that was pretty likely to happen, but it wasn't the case. I think it was more shocking than anything. If it happens again, I think the country will probably burn itself to the ground. Having said that, if Trump did get killed that day, I think his supporters would have gone nuts, and I definitely think they would have rioted in Washington and probably tried to storm the Capitol building again. Trump Derangement Syndrome is a real thing. I mean, is Trump really that bad, or is this the woke propaganda machine of the insane left, which in the last 15 years have become pretty close to the Communist Party? They were all for equality and justice, and that seems to have gone so far in the opposite direction now. Because what they want is not equality and justice for all, it's supremacy to anything they don't fucking like, which is the same shit the Bolsheviks did. Biden's put him in a crosshairs quote does say a lot. So in a way, the Democrats are guilty for marginalising Trump and his supporters, their rhetoric condoning violence, and this isn't something you can or cannot read too much into. He flat out said, put him in the crosshairs and I'd like to punch him in the face. If that's not condoning violence, I don't know what the fuck is. Condoning violence against Trump and his supporters, or anyone in the political spectrum, or just in general, is fucked and it's sickening. This has never been okay in Western politics to this level, but in 2024 it is, and it just seems this is how politics are played. The ideology war has gone to a new level. This type of thing is very reminiscent of what the communists did and how they discredited their opponents. Lenin labelled the Tsar the enemy of the people. He put all his anger and all his frustration on one person, got everyone incensed that the injustice being done to them was all the fault of one man, which you'll be able to hear all about in the upcoming epic Lie of Communism. If you keep saying something about somebody or someone, regardless of whether it's true or not, after enough time has passed, people will start to believe it. If you call Trump, the Republican Party, and his supporters Nazis for just long enough, the people who don't like Trump and his supporters will start to believe it because it fits their ideology and their own agenda. They don't like Trump already, and by calling him something that is worse than what he actually is, legitimizes and galvanizes that hate that it is okay. Because, yeah, in my mind, that Trump guy is a Nazi. Nazis are bad, right? So let's treat him and his supporters like Nazis, because they all have to be tarnished with the same brush. They're all lumped into the same group. If their leader is quote-unquote a Nazi, they all have to be. It's an insane mind virus. And the quicker the world wakes up to this fucking bullshit and this manipulation of ideology, the better. Which is a few of the reasons why I have dedicated the past several years to really looking into communism and writing this epic upcoming podcast series. And it's not all the individual's fault either. Brainwashing happens on every level these days. Advertisement news, movies, everything. Propaganda and bullshit are fucking everywhere. In my own personal experience, I too have been caught up in this type of shit. You hear something on the news, you can't be bothered looking into it too much, or you just don't have time, whatever it is. So you just believe whatever the news reporter says, or whatever you read somewhere. And then you look into it a bit further, and it's not quite the truth. The news does this every fucking day. When I was watching the assassination attempt play out, the amount of misinformation just one news outlet put out was mind-blowing. I know it's a live event. Information kept changing, new reports kept coming in, but they just kept on more or less just making up facts because they had time to fill. They're like, oh, we're getting reports now that there was, this many people killed or whatever, and then that would change. And this happens even when something dramatic hasn't happened in the world. They'll have a house burned down overnight. It was 2 stories, and then by the time it gets to the next news bulletin in 20 minutes time, it's changed to a 1-story house, 10 people dead. But before it was 2 stories and it was 3 people dead. So what changed in that 20 minutes to change the quote-unquote flow of information? This is a big issue while watching all of this play out. The facts changed constantly. It got very hard to determine what was fact and what was not. And just when you've picked up a story and you've got this idea of what happened in your head, okay, this happened, Trump was shot, 4 people were injured, next news break, oh, it was only 2 people injured, 10 shots were fired, whatever it happened to be. 24 hours down the track, there's already so much misinformation out there, it's nearly impossible to know 100% for sure what actually happened. You'd be forgiven for thinking like this too, because so much of what we see is a condensed version of what actually happened. It's the highlight reel of negativity. Trump says something outrageous like, oh, Camilla's pretending she's black now or whatever. But they won't play the 15-minute talk that went along with that. They just give you that 30-second soundbite, clickbaity title that's going to generate outrage. Political violence is wrong. It's hard to believe this type of thing is happening again. You'd think that this type of event was a thing of the past, assigned to the 1960s and not 2024. Republicans should take the high road and not overreact, which to some degree they did. And then they started pointing the finger and blaming Democrats for causing this. Yeah, and rightfully so. As we've seen, there's an argument on both sides. To a degree, some of the blame has to be laid at the Democrats' feet, but not all of it. The Republicans haven't exactly been very nice over the past 200 years or so, and both sides are to blame. On page 7, there's another interesting article that relates to what I'm talking about. It's called Politicians Plagued by a Legacy of Deadly Violence by David Mills. While some claim the shooting of Donald Trump is a byproduct of America's bitter partisan divide, the reality is that the US is no stranger to political assassinations and violence against politicians, in an increasing problem worldwide. A 2008 research paper by the Congressional Research Service, predating the Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations, said direct assaults against presidents, president-elects, and candidates had occurred on 15 separate occasions in US history, with 5 resulting in death. The most recent shooting of a candidate was Alabama Governor George C. Wallace, 52, who was seeking the Democratic nomination for the presidency in May 1972, when he was shot and left paralyzed. The most recent fatal shooting of a candidate during a campaign was Robert F. Kennedy in May 1968. JFK was 1 year out from potential re-election when he was gunned down in Dallas, Texas in November of 1963. You probably noticed the fuck up in the date. The correct date is November of 1963. But other presidents were fairly early in their terms when attempts were made on their lives. Ronald Reagan was shot just 2 months into his term when he was shot in 1981, while Gerald Ford survived 2 assassination attempts just over a year after he became president. Members of Congress have also been targeted by shooters. Gabby Giffords, an Arizona Democrat, suffered a traumatic brain injury when she was shot in January 2011, while Steve Scalise, a Republican from Louisiana, was shot in the hip by an extremist at a sporting event in 2017. Worldwide, there has been been an alarm about the violence faced by political candidates. In 2022, the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was shot dead during a campaign event in Nara. While Britain has reeled from two tragedies, the shooting and stabbing of Labour MP Joe Cox in 2016 and the fatal stabbing of Conservative MP David Armes by an Islamic extremist in 2021. So unfortunately this type of thing isn't new, and it doesn't seem to be rare. It actually seems to be increasing in the modern age. The 60s and 70s it's a bit more spread out. Is it all just some lunatic with a grudge, lone wolf attacks, or is there a more sinister conspiracy behind them? I don't think we'll ever really know. And this makes you wonder, did the Democrats have something to do with Trump's trial and all the other shit designed to derail his re-election campaign? Apparently the judge in his trial was a Democratic donor to Biden or the Democratic Party. Don't quote me on that, I'm not 100% sure. But it does seem like someone really wanted to stop him. Because one thing failed, then they'd have another scam against him, then another one, then another one. It does seem a little suspicious. And rightfully so. Not everything he did was good. He's not 100% squeaky clean. And then there's the giant elephant in the room that has to be mentioned when you're talking about Trump's presidency and his legacy. And that is the January 6th Capitol attack riots, or whatever you want to call them. However, the more that comes to light about that, the more truth gets revealed. It doesn't look like it was quite as bad as it was first reported. Several years ago, reports surfaced about the pictures being doctored. More smoke and fire was added to make it look more dramatic, when in fact I think it was a sunny-ish day. It wasn't as overcast as it looked. There wasn't as much smoke. And apparently I've heard in recent weeks that the death toll too had been exaggerated or even made up. Apparently only a Trump supporter died. I'm not too sure on that. I haven't had time to fact check. But that's very interesting if it is true. But having said that, wherever there's smoke, fire usually follows. If you want to lay all the blame at Trump and say he's the worst president ever, then you'd have to ignore all the bad shit done in office under other presidents. Trump doesn't have the death toll or the kill count that some of his former counterparts did. Bush, Obama, Clinton and Biden, they all have pretty hefty body counts under their belts. Look at the shit that happened under Biden's administration. The total clusterfuck that was the Afghanistan withdrawal. Ukraine and Russia, Israel and Gaza, the border crisis. A lot of shit happened under his watch. But for whatever reason, Biden doesn't get as heavily scrutinized as Trump does. Trump has actively wanted to end wars and death, and he's been criticized for it. Republicans have even called the last election stolen due to the electronic voting machines, and for some other reasons I can't really remember. Which is probably true. All elections are tampered with to some degree, aren't they? You can't win with some people, especially with warmongering corporate commie satanic despots who serve the shadow government. In recent years, the left has become more right than the far right has ever been. Was the attempt on Trump an attempt on Trump, or was it part of something bigger? Is it a conspiracy, or was it just some fringe beta soy boy lone wolf, John Wilkes Booth wannabe, loner with an agenda? As I said before, the shooter didn't even look like he could carry the AR-15 he fired, let alone hit anything with it, which is ironic in itself. America's gun nearly killed what some would call America's president. It's ironic in that sense that an AR-15 was found at the scene. But given the availability of the gun, it doesn't really seem like much of a shock. Apparently he didn't even have a scope either. He was shooting iron sights. Then again, from that distance, that's not a great feat. But for someone who apparently wasn't very good on the rifle range, that does say a lot. Because if he wasn't very good with a gun, presumably with a scope, chances are he's probably going to be worse with a gun without a scope. And one final article from The Advertiser. This is on page 9 by Andrew Bolt, titled "Real Threat Was from Left Field. No one can hide from this truth. Whoever shot Donald Trump, whether some crazy or left-wing extremist, the assassination attempt was part of a plot. No, not a deliberate worked out plot to kill the man most likely to become president again. I mean the plot to make Trump seem so evil. Of course someone would figure they had to stop the new Hitler, and the blame for that goes all the way to the top, to desperate President Joe Biden, who has terrified Americans of the left by planting Trump as a wannabe dictator who just had to be stopped by almost any means. That's true. And looking into communism for the past couple of years, Trump is not even close to being a dictator. People in the West can't even imagine how bad it would be to live under a totalitarian regime, let alone imagine the horrors that come with it. No leader in the West is even close to coming near the insanity of Stalin, Mao, Lenin, Hitler, or any other of the psychotic dictators of the 20th century. Let alone Trump or Biden or anyone else. I mean, some of the ideas the left are throwing around are borderline communist, but the reality is completely separate to that of a full communist dictatorship. Take Biden's TV ad last month, demonizing Trump, quote, "There is nothing more sacred than our democracy, but Donald Trump ready to burn it all down." All this Biden ad just 2 days before the shooting, accusing Trump of being the poodle of Russia's war criminal president. Quote, "This is who Donald Trump is. The United States must never be like Putin's Russia. We don't empower dictators." And that is just complete bullshit. As I just said, Trump is nowhere near that type of level. He's nowhere near Putin's level either. In Western democracies, it's pretty much, well, should be pretty much impossible to end up like Russia in the 1920s. Biden's team also got actor Robert De Niro, who declared, quote, "I'd like to punch Donald Trump in the face," to narrate an ad savaging Trump. Now he's running again, this time threatening to be dictator to terminate the Constitution. Everything I've seen from Trump, like obviously I've never met the guy, he seems to genuinely love America and its democratic freedoms. He's someone that's profited greatly from a democratic and capitalist society. He's a billionaire, yeah, he's a very successful businessman, like his father and grandfather. Why would he want to jeopardize that? Yeah, he said a lot of stupid stuff. It doesn't mean all of it's true. I think he's one of these guys that's more about the entertainment rather than the theological rhetoric of everything that comes out of his mouth. He's more shock and awe. It kept coming. 2 weeks ago, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi declared on national television that, quote, "This is not a normal election and Trump must be stopped. He cannot become president." And talking to donors this past fortnight, Biden repeatedly urged, "It's time to put Trump in a bullseye." Sure, Biden didn't mean that literally, but the media forgave that inflammatory language. In a way it never would have if Trump used it against Biden. Democrats seem to believe their own hysteria. What else, short of violence, didn't they do to make Trump seem an evil that had to be stopped by hook or by crook? For years the Democrats pushed the bogus claim that Trump stole the 2016 election by colluding with Russia. Then Democrats also falsely accused Trump of sending a mob to invade Congress to stop Biden, replacing him as president. Biden even falsely accused Trump of having, quote, "sat and watched the cops being killed," when the only person killed was a female Trump supporter shot by the police. Interesting. In light of that, it makes the Democrats look fearful and insane when they get actors like Robert De Niro or whoever else to come on TV and say this guy needs to be stopped, he's a threat to the Constitution. Because isn't Steve Bannon in jail, and wasn't he jailed by the Democrats for having something to do with the Trump campaign? Even though he got fired 2 years into it and didn't have anything to do with the Capitol riots, he went to jail, and then that lunatic AOC says she's fearful that if Trump gets re-elected, her and others like her will be rounded up and put in jail, despite the fact that people like you put Bannon in jail and make jokes and laugh about it, saying he went to the general population, and if something happened to him there, that would be funny, or something along those lines. It's the sick condoning and wishing violence upon political opponents that is really fucked up in this situation. And going back to what I was saying about communism, this is what the communists did. This is how Lenin operated. Any threat to him would be taken out. And it usually meant going to a gulag or disappearing somewhere. The communists solved all their problems with violence, and it escalated very quickly. Once they got what they wanted, they didn't stop. And something happens in those years, and insanity prevails. Anyone, even a minor threat to the party, must be dealt with the utmost severity. This is the same shit. Like, what is any of this based off of? How would he know that he sat and quote unquote watched cops being killed? And that was the report from the January 6th riots, that police were killed by Trump protesters. I had a look at some of the photos, and I didn't see too many guns in the Trump protesters' hands. Yeah, they're wearing helmets and tactical gear, and one dude was dressed like a bison. But it was more so getting into the Capitol and running amok, sitting in people's chairs with your feet on the desk, acting like tools. It didn't look as violent as it was reported by the left. And look, that's a political tactic. Yeah, everything's fair and love war and politics. But it gets to a point where people believe this shit. I mean, who's had more collusion in Russia, Biden or Trump? Because it wasn't that the whole big issue with the Hunter Biden laptop story. It got suppressed through Facebook at the request of the government. You could find things on it, but you couldn't comment or you couldn't search for it or something like that. There was a whole big conspiracy around that. And what was Hunter Biden doing in the Ukraine? He had a lot of business dealings. But then they want to go after Trump for a similar thing. And all that money that's been pumped into the Ukrainian-Russian war. A few years ago they wanted peace, and now they want this never-ending war, and they're prepared to back Ukraine by any means necessary for the next decade. How is that good for anyone? There's not going to be anyone fucking left alive if the Biden government gets their way. Biden's son, Hunter, is on the Biazma, or whatever that company's called, board of directors. It's a Ukrainian power company. What the fuck is he doing on the board of a Ukrainian power company? Seems a little sus. If you don't believe me, look into it. This Trump Derangement Syndrome isn't just a slogan. It is a sick reality in the US that looks at times almost on the edge of civil war. God knows what would have happened had the bullet that clipped Trump's ear been 2 inches to the right. The Democrats even felt licensed to bend and strain the law to launch 4 separate legal cases to get Trump jailed or at least crippled ahead of the November election. Yeah, and that's also inexcusable. Bending the law. If they treated Trump like that, they would treat any Trump supporter the same way, or anyone, for that matter, who got in their way. It's always little things like that, bending the law, doing a couple of favors for a friend to get someone elected, get someone in a position of power. Nancy Pelosi making it illegal to get done for insider trading if you're in her position, treating Trump and his supporters like vermin, things like that. The bending of laws here, trampling on civil liberties there that lead to totalitarian regimes and parties like the Bolsheviks rising to power, implementing communism and fundamentally destroying society. And that usually results in the deaths of millions of people. And the left media did their bit. The New Republic last month ran a cover of Trump with a Hitler mustache and a headline, quote, American Fascism, what it would look like. The left-wing American Prospect magazine ran this headline, quote, American Fascism. The New Yorker went with, why we can't stop arguing about whether Trump is a fascist. As I said before, he's nowhere near the level of a fascist. Just because he doesn't like the opposition doesn't mean he's a fascist. And same goes for the Democrats. That they look more fascist the way they treat Trump and his supporters. Trump treats them more like a joke. If anyone is acting like fascists, it's the left. They're more indicative of fascist regimes of the 1920s and throughout history than Trump has ever been. And all the way through media outlets falsely accused Trump of praising neo-Nazis as, quote, good people or planning to be a dictator one day and more. So can anyone be surprised if someone may have decided to remove a man they've been told is a monstrous evil, a Hitler? Few in politics have been luckier in their choice of enemies than Trump. His enemies have now made him so much stronger. The Democrats' attempts to co-opt the FBI into making Trump seem in collusion with Putin just made the deep state look corrupt. The Democrats' attempts to stop Trump's campaign in the courts just made the justice system look corrupt and Trump's support grow. And now this attempted assassination will make Trump unbeatable in the election, not just because he acted like a man with balls of steel, shrugging off his security when the shooting ended to wave a fist and shout, fight, fight, The contrast with feeble Joe Biden could not be stronger. But more, this attack will stop Biden playing his lunatic dictator Trump card and will wake up more Americans to the real threat to their peace and freedom. No, it's not the right, it really is the left, which must reflect how it's become the very threat it saw in Trump. End of article. Interesting. A lot of that I think is true. All the more the reason to get rid of Biden, force him into resigning, into retirement, and putting forth the new woke hope in Kamala. She's a new face of the Democrats. As I said before, she's using the same tactics from the past. Black versus white, male versus female, good versus bad, corrupt versus uncorrupt. It's the same old fucking story. And it makes more sense that everything the Democrats have tried so far has failed against Trump. The assassination attempt made him so much stronger and a far more attractive opponent, especially by people in the middle who are undecided. Biden didn't have much to throw at Trump, and I think his bag of tricks is all out. So, next logical conclusion, put in a younger, fresh face that can lead the Democratic Party against Trump in November. The only problem is that face is a laughing, untrustworthy lunatic, in my opinion. I thought they were going to go with a left of field option, someone nobody really knew, a new face, a new persona, a new identity they could get behind to lead the Democrats into the future, but no, they really went to the bottom of the barrel and got the only option available to them, which was Kamala. It doesn't say a lot about the political candidates when you really have two choices, two old guys, both are rich, one has dementia, one's a bit out there, and there's nobody really under them. I don't think RFK's got a hope. But yeah, I guess we'll see how it all pans out in November. A few weeks ago, Trump couldn't lose and looked like he was a shoo-in to be president again. The Republican convention, a few days after the assassination attempt, was massive. There was lots of money raised, lots of emotion. I mean, how can you go wrong? You had Hulk Hogan and Kid Rock. He came out on stage. He hugged the deceased firefighter's uniform who had been killed at the rally. Trump looked like a different man. He looked like he had been humbled by the experience. He had his family talking about him. I think the granddaughter came out on stage. She came out and said she couldn't understand why someone would want to shoot Grandpa. And Trump milked it a bit, and why wouldn't you? I would. The new vice president nominee was announced, J.D. Vance. It looked like he was unstoppable and he was going to be the next president. Then Biden disappears. He resigns. Kamala is now the new leader of the Democratic Party. Their popularity spikes for a week. And now it's just back to business as usual. A few weeks ago, I would have bet Trump was a safe bet. I'm not so sure now. But only time will tell, and we'll have to wait till November to find out for sure. So once again, Alex Jones was right. He predicted someone was going to assassinate Trump, and admittedly that wasn't the hardest of predictions to make. I wouldn't call it obvious, but there was a high probability someone was going to try, and everything we've seen so far with the rhetoric from the Democrats, punch him in the face, put him in the bullseye, making Trump out like he's this fascist dictator and worse than Hitler, has most likely contributed to what played out on the 13th of July. I wouldn't be surprised if there was another attempt. Let's hope sanity prevails, but only time will tell. I think no matter what the outcome of the election in November, something is going to happen. Either side, the Democrats or the Republicans, I don't think are going to accept who is elected, and I'll be very surprised if diplomacy, nicety, and showing reverence and class for your opponent will prevail. I think there'll be a lot of name-calling, a lot of pointing the fingers, and a lot of blame. If Trump wins, Kamala will be cordial. In the days afterwards, then the blame game campaign will start, followed by a campaign to get rid of Trump and put the Democrats back in power. Same thing, if Trump loses, his fan base will say the election's rigged. This is a repeat of 2016. We want to recount and probably march on the Capitol again and burn it to the ground. This is all theoretical. I hope none of this happens. This is a worst case scenario. Either side isn't going to accept who is elected and will both cry wolf and claim that the election was rigged. You know what? The November election, and pretty much every other election that takes place in the world, is probably more or less rigged anyway. My theory is America is going to become even more divided than it already has been. Civil war might be a bit of a stretch, but stranger things have happened, and given the projection of things in the last 10 years, I wouldn't be surprised if pigs started flying. I hope it doesn't come to that. It is plausible, however likely, I'm not sure. And that brings up the big question, civil war, is that possible again? Some would say yes, some would say no. If Trump wins, there will be protests. If he loses, there might be a repeat of 4 years ago or even worse. So let's hope cooler heads and sanity prevail.
G'day. Don't skip. Let me interrupt the podcast that you're currently listening to with some blatant self-promotion. What do you get when you mix two Aussie mates, a splash of booze, or more than a splash, and some microphones? You get Cheers Big Ears, hosted by myself, the Chad, and my mate, Matt, and sometimes, but more often than not now, my missus, Bobby. It's a podcast of adult beverages and not-so-adult conversation. It's not serious, far from it. Well, except for that one episode, but that was just that one. We're available wherever you get your podcast fix. Cheers, Big Ears.
And with that brings us to the end of the show and our deep and detailed dive into the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. So what do you think? Do you think it's a inside job by the deep state, or is it just some lunatic fringe lone wolf attack and a purely random tragedy? Or do you think there's something more to it? Who do you think will win the election, Trump or Kamala? I've got a name right for once. I've called her Camilla and Kamala. I'm not betting on anyone. I got no idea who's going to win. It's anyone's election. As I mentioned previously, I would have bet Trump was a shoo-in a couple of months ago. Fast forward a few months and I'm not so sure. Do you pick the Donald that everyone's already seen for the last 4 years, or do you go with the unknown and unproven Kamala? Is it time for change, or is it time for more of the same? I think November is going to be a very dramatic month in the US, and hopefully things don't get too out of control, as a lot of people are predicting they are going to. Who's going to be next president? Is it going to be Donald Trump again, or is it going to be Kamala? Only time will tell, and let's hope cooler heads prevail. It's anyone's race at this point, but I think whoever does win, America loses. Something is going to happen in November, whether it be riots or protests or complete anarchy or civil war. I don't think civil war is too likely to happen. I think that's worst case scenario, but I've got a feeling something is going to happen during the 2024 election. But let's hope sanity prevails. Alright, big thank you to everyone who listened. If you'd like to support the Truth Tank, there's a couple of things you can do. Head on over to the Facebook and Instagram page, give them a follow and a like. Download the Truth Tank on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Music if it's still around, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Castbox, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anyone you think might like the show. Help spread the word and get the Truth Tank out there. If you're enjoying the show, why not leave a 5-star rating and review? It helps the show grow and rise through the ranks. The lie communism is finally done. Make sure you set the reminders and mark the calendar, because March 2025, the lie begins. Hashtag the lie begins. Alright, big thank you to everyone who listened. I'll be back in the next couple of weeks with a brand new episode, but until then, I'm a tank, and this is the truth. May the truth be with you.
All engine running. Liftoff. We have a